welcome all of you to today's Zoom meeting. This is number 71. We will hit number 100, I hope sometime next year, or maybe by the end of this year. Who knows? I don't know how we're going to celebrate. Maybe we'll watch them all. No. Anyway, we have some good topics today. They are not theoretical issues. They are pretty much down to earth. And I think all of us can venture forth some pretty solid opinions. And the first one today is what are core techniques? What are core movements? That includes what is the role of generic technique names, which some systems use and other systems use really creative names. I think there's one rule that refers to Tomonagi. I don't know what the Japanese is, but the English is the cow jumped over the moon. And that's an utterly bad joke, but no, but I'm serious. That's what they call it. You know, technique commonalities, and also common technique labeling. So those are the issues that come under core techniques. What are they? So does anyone want to? I mean, I believe in jiu-jitsu there are probably maybe only 20 or 30 core techniques, and all the variations and combinations and what have you work from that. And if Jerry Hines was here, who's a science person, there is a formula for determining all the possible combinations, and it's probably between 15 and 20,000 combinations. It doesn't mean they're all valid, or they all would work. But as far as core techniques are concerned, I think, and it's a subjective opinion on my part, that there are maybe only 20 or 30 what I call core techniques in Japanese jiu-jitsu. So anybody wants to launch forth and their thoughts on core techniques or their value, or go ahead.
Okay, what I have discovered by training, especially by training juniors, also small children, that is, if you learn a technique as a core technique in the right way, then you can do a lot of the other combinations. So if you find a core technique, it's a kind of a technique that suits well together with all the rest of the core techniques. That's what I will call a core technique. A technique you can use in many different ways. Example, if you have a Tai Otoshi, that's the basic technique, the core technique, and then you have different wrist grabs like kotegaeshi or something like that. You can, out of that basic technique Tai Otoshi, add a different way of throwing with different hand locks. So you have a basic technique, the throw or the system of all throws, and then you can add the other core techniques like hand throws or something like that, and add them into the system, where you get out of a Tai Otoshi 5 different techniques by just using different elements of what you have learned.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if Morning Thomas and Dane were dealing with the first topic, which is core techniques. Yes. Yeah. But in any event, yeah, like Teinagi hand throw, or it's also called kotegaeshi in some systems, which is a more modern term. I think with core techniques, one of the things I look at that the attack is almost irrelevant. you can use a hand throw for almost any attack coming at you. And that's what makes it a core technique. And as Joni said, yes, there are many different variations on the hand throw, tenagi. And that's also what makes it a core technique. And it can be done in many different ways. There probably, if I went into the Densho, there are probably very few techniques that can only be, core techniques, basic techniques that can only be done one way. And that's what frustrated a lot of students of Seki, was that he kept showing different ways to do the same things. It's like, for those of you who, we all walk, but all of us walk differently. I guess that's a generic analogy, I guess. Any other comments on core techniques, or what is their role or purpose, or how do they make an art work? Or
I would add to the question, Sensei. I would just defining what a core technique is, I think can be a little subjective to who it is, who's the individual. I mean, I guess it depends on your creativity, on how you can approach things. And I understand that the human anatomy only works a certain way, and you can only apply things a certain way to be effective. But I may know some applications of a technique that may be completely different from Dave. And Dave may have a different mindset on how he can apply a technique and it be just as effective as something that I'm doing in a totally different way, or entering it, or adding another variation of something else to it, and being able to flow through other techniques with it as well. So just looking at it like that, and I think that jiu-jitsu has also continued to, and we've talked about this a bunch in just about every session, is continue to evolve with people being able to identify new ways of applying techniques, not necessarily doing a technique different that's effective and it's going to work for you, but just being able to apply it in different ways in different scenarios, depending on what is actually happening at that moment. But that's my only thing. I just, I don't know that we can ever just say that. To me, I may have some favorite techniques that I might go to, that I may do initially, that might come to mind, or if it's just a reaction from me or whatever. But that may be different from someone else. And so I think that core techniques can change as well.
Good. Let's hold on for just a second here, because Ernest joined us. I don't have any audio from you right now, Ernest. But
there were some problems getting on this morning. I'm not sure what was going on. It didn't want to connect.
okay, now you're still Thomas. Ernest gave me a phone call yesterday that Dave was near the end of his first journey, so to speak. And we did at the outset, before we came on the air, we did have a moment of silence for Dave, just out of respect. I don't know whether he is still, quote unquote, with us, or whether he has gone off to the great tatami in the sky. But he was we didn't always agree, but he had a very, how do you say, he was a very respectable person, and knowledgeable, and giving, and okay, we just got a text message from Ernest. Hasn't heard from his sister yet today.
Daughter, yeah, his daughter.
His daughter.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So
he does have a sister, but
right.
I was in touch with his daughter.
Right. So anyway, so there's no update yet on
Not that I got before our call. I talked to his daughter last night about 10 o'clock, and Dave was still hanging in there. He talked about not being agreeing all the time with him. He just might be too stubborn to listen to the doctors.
Yeah, I think most time as we get older, we tend to be a little more stubborn.
He just went down. He told me he just went down really fast. He said he was dealing with his issues, but then the wheels came off. That's the quote. And I think that his organs were shutting down yesterday, and that's why it just came so sudden.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we all wish him and his family the best, and the transition will be a peaceful one. And you have to look at the positive things a person has done, and because ultimately that's what the memories are made of. So
He's done a lot of positive things. He started out the AJA as a secretary,
right,
and worked his way through to being a very effective president of the AJA.
right,
And he was a mentor and a role model for a lot of people.
right,
And
right.
he led from behind, he led beside, and he led in front. Now, all three ways a person can lead. Outstanding man.
Yes, yes. Okay, so
Since on this topic of multiple technique, I'm sorry, of core techniques, I was going to share with you something that came to mind from earlier sharing. Udigarumas, there's so many of them, and that's certainly a core technique. And then Koshinagi and Taitosh. And came to mind is one of my favorite is always have another technique in mind in case the technique you're working on or you're using is not working. And so multiple technique flow is a result. One of the times working with multiple technique flow, I found myself combining an Udigaruma with a Taitosh, and right behind it, combining an Udigaruma with a Koshinagi. And what's interesting is that if the Koshinagi were to fail, the Udigaruma is still there.
yeah,
And that Udigaruma, the way it's set, could either be a backwards arm break at the elbow or a hyperextension. Very, very easily modified, or the way it's set in place. So sometimes when you combine techniques of any kind, but especially core techniques, you have lots of options, because your uke or the aggressor it hurts more than one place. And once they hurt more than one place, their brain goes cattywampus.
right. For example, when people see a Udigaruma, which I call a shoulder lock, which you normally set up for a rear throw, and then you put it together with a Koshinagi hip throw. What people don't realize is that in the process of the throw itself, there's absolutely, if you're doing it right, there is no pressure on the shoulder joint. Pressure on the shoulder joint is before the throw and after they hit the ground. But while you're throwing, it looks absolutely vicious, but it really isn't. And for those of you who teach that combination, if you reassure the students that if they take their time, their feel will tell them that there is no pressure on the shoulder as they're actually doing the actual throw. Now, I don't know about Harigoshi, because that's not as controllable as a Koshinagi. But as long as you have a controllable hip throw variation, it's going to take the pressure off of whatever other technique you're doing, as long as you're not doing it really fast. The faster you go, the less control you actually have. So,
So I got one more quick thing here. So I think where it it's different for me. What's just kind of clicking is the idea of technique, core techniques versus kind of like a core concept. So I think, like, if you look at it from techniques, I think it's almost backwards. Like, what are the core words you use when you talk? You can't really do that. You can't make a list of your core words, but you can make a list of the core things you have to express. Like, you're happy, you're angry, you're sad, you're tired, or you're energetic. Like, there's not a lot of them. And then you have a lot of words that mean those things. So when you're entering into a conversation, you don't think about what vocabulary you need to use. You think about what you're trying to express. So, you know, when you're engaging in this conversation, I'm letting this person know I'm angry, and then the language will follow. Or I'm letting them know I'm sad, and the language will follow. I don't have to use these certain words. And I think that's what, again, in the Mushin thing too, I think that's what you're doing, is you're trying to just express what you're trying to do, not thinking about how to do it. So I think the core things are like the 8 directions. Like, I need to move this person north. I need to move them south. I need to move them diagonally. I need to twist something. I need to either turn it left or turn it right. I need to pull them towards me or push them away from me. I need to lift them up or pull them down. Once I've established that, like, this guy's in a position that he needs to go backwards. Now I'll find the language to move him backwards. You know what I mean? So, like, I think that's how you do it when you're not thinking. It's like, what am I trying to do? And then what's the quickest way to do that? What's the, you know, so I think it's, and when in doubt, you just have to do the other thing. Like, you don't flow from technique to technique. You kind of flow from idea to idea. Like, I'm going to try to make you go over here. And then you say, no, I'm not. Now I have to try to make you go over here, you know, using you. Like, I have to listen to what you're saying and respond, but I can't plan that out. I can't know over here that the next thing I'm going to do is an arm bar instead of a Kodagaish. I just have to feel that and say, okay, now we're going this way. So I think it comes down to what direction you're going, and that's the technique. And then whatever you do is whatever vocabulary word you used, whether you said mad, disappointed, angry, those words don't matter. You're letting them know what you think.
Yeah.
You started this in the context of Mushin, correct?
Yeah. I think you don't think about what you're going to say. You just have something to say, kind of a thing.
Okay.
Like, you don't prepare a speech and then try to deliver it. You say what comes to mind in the moment, but you never go off track because you mean it. You know what I mean?
I like that analogy.
It's a good analogy. It really, it's a different definition of Mushin, but it really works nicely so that a person who has no concept of Mushin can understand it. Yeah, you have to be, as Seki would say, you have to be sensitive to the needs of the other person. And if they need or want to go in one direction, you have to help them to the best of your ability. Which,
Sensei, it's interesting because earlier you stated that Udiguruma you think of as a shoulder lock, and certainly there are certain Udigurumas where Udiguruma technically is arm grapple.
yeah, it could be an arm bar too.
Exactly, that was the point. I was going to make it could be an arm bar, and the case I was talking about 4 different arm bars in a multiple technique flow sequence that are used. But what's kind of interesting is that when you talk about an Udiguruma as a shoulder lock, the arm wrestle has gone to the parent joint. It's gone to the shoulder,
Right.
the top of the arm, and it's still a Udiguruma, as you say.
Right. And if it's an arm bar, it's at the elbow. The pressure is at the elbow. But ultimately affects the shoulder joint.
Absolutely.
So, Anyway,
George, I had a thought on core techniques. I'm not sure. I think it goes back a little too far, and I missed the discussion on anatomy, and I apologize for that. But we had this discussion years ago with you. One of my students asked you about why I named so many things the same thing, and they look completely different. Sounds like what happened with Seiki. I tried to teach them after that. I said, I'm going to just deal with this joint. That's all we're going to deal with. How do we compromise this joint? And I didn't have the vocabulary for that to say, just take this particular joint and twist it this particular way. Kotegash, wrist lock is the same thing we do against a kick, and it's an ankle lock. It's the same technique. We do the same thing. Elbow lock, hyperextend the elbow. We do that against the knee. We even do the hip lock the same as a shoulder lock. Can't get the same effect as taking somebody backwards in an Udiguruma Shiro, but they're all basically the same. You compromise the joint, and understanding how the joint, where the joint's weaknesses are, is what's important. Sometimes our terminology gets confusing.
yes, I think one of the things I like about, and I will use generic terminology as much as possible, and Seki did, was because once a student, learns the Japanese te nagi, and they realize, oh, it has something to do with the hand. It's a hand technique, and that narrows what you have. Maitte nagi, okute nagi, shirute nagi. You can have all these different descriptive words that are added to hand throw. But if the student knows that it deals with the hand, there are only so many things you can do with the hand or wrist joint. And once they get that down, if you refer to the generic term, they know what part of the body you're referring to that is the most important part of the technique, or the core of the technique. Which is, for te nagi, basically what you're doing is you're torquing the wrist to the point where the person either goes, or they break their wrist and they go. And the same thing as Yusatama, the same thing applies to a shoulder lock or a takedown. Foot wind for a kick, key turn, head. It's all essentially the same movement technique. We're trying to lock the joint, which forces the body to move. And once the students get that concept, which is probably the hardest thing for them to learn, a lot of techniques tend to fall into place. Oh, this is why we do this. Because it's usually the same explanation for every technique.
Actually, in Sweden, they do in two dan test. They have it so that they actually only have 2 of 4 or 5 core techniques, and the whole dan test is a subject around those 5 core techniques in different street situations.
Yeah, I think if we really want to get core techniques down to a smaller number, if we said the purpose of any joint lock is to move the body, the torso, and the way you move the torso is to torque the joint to the point where it locks. And then you can do the child joint and parent joint, child joints, and work your way up. all of the explanations for all these techniques are essentially the same. But that would blow everyone's mind away, because then all you have to do as a sensei is teach one technique. Teach one technique. And oh,
That
gee.
would simplify things, yeah.
And there are 300 ways to do this core technique. So maybe there's a method to the madness to the sensei who says, only teach one technique. So I guess philosophically, we can come back to the question of what is a core technique? I'm asking that seriously. What is a core technique?
According to what you just said, Sensei, it's moving the aggressor's Saki Tanden.
Moving their what?
Their Saki Tanden.
Okay. Yeah, you're moving their torso, their center point. Yes, that's it. Now we can all go out and teach Saki Tanden Kata, or call it Saki Tanden Jujitsu, or something else. So, or we call it torso waza. Anyway, okay, let's move on here. Okay,
We invented a new rule.
pardon?
So we invented a
yes.
new rule. Let's write a book.
Yeah, simple rule. I guess it follows the KISS theory, which is keep it simple, Sensei. Okay, next topic is random attack. Are you getting some background noise somewhere?
Yeah.
Yes, all of us are.
Yeah. Wondering where it's
Johnny, could you kill your audio for a bit?
Yeah, let me turn.
Yeah,
Let's,
I'm
let's,
checking that.
let's, who just turned off their audio? Raise your hand.
Just,
Okay, well, that didn't do it. Let me.
I'll try to take my audio off. I'm trying to find it.
Are we still talking here? Yep, still there. Let me see if I'm there. How do I shut off my audio on this? Oh. Recording. No, that's not going to help me. If I mute myself, let's see what happens here.
It was gone before you muted yourself, Sensei.
Okay, it was gone beforehand.
Yes,
And I
it's
think
gone now.
it looks
gone
like it's
now.
Joni.
Yeah, it's gone now.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a great Zoom key that's been bothering us. Anyway, okay. Hopefully it will not return. Okay. Random attack practice versus kata. Which one builds more success for street survival? And I guess there should be an extra question in there is the value of kata, this is going back to what Dane said previously with the Mushin description, is the value of kata to program movement in your mind so that when you get into a street situation, the kata is there and you know what should be working. Are we okay there, Dane? Yeah.
Yep, I think that's fair. Yep.
Yeah. So maybe it's not a fair question to ask which one builds more success for street survival.
Aren't
Well,
they
you need
two
both at
different
the right
things?
time, right?
Pardon?
You need both at the right time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would concur with that. Yes.
They do two different things.
Yeah.
If you're doing kata, that's building up muscle memory, so it becomes automatic.
Right.
If you're doing random techniques, that's building up your ability to respond to something without knowing ahead of time what it is. They build two different muscles in our body, and
Okay.
you need both.
Okay.
And kind of like the like the language thing again, if you think of it like you're learning a new language, you need to sit in the classroom and learn vocabulary, then practice conversations, then you need to have real conversations in that language, right? Where you just have spontaneous conversations, the ultimate goal there. And I think the not only learning the vocabulary part of it, like when you're doing the kata, you're learning the techniques, you're training the response. So, you know, if I need this guy to go this way, this is a thing that does that. This is a thing that does that, all of that. But I think you're also training the, you're training like what it should look like if it was spontaneous. You know, it's training that reaction time. Like if you only did spontaneous things, but you don't know what spontaneously to do, you're going to freeze. And the kata teaches you, it has an answer ready for you to say, and it becomes training your response time. You know, so you know, as soon as an attack comes, I respond this quickly. Then when you're doing it in free form and you don't know what that response is going to be, the idea is you'll react so quickly that you don't have time to think. And then the Mushin will just take over. You're not giving yourself time to be anything but Mushin, kind of.
Right.
You want to react before you run out of Mushin.
Right. Because in a street situation, you initially don't have time to think.
Right.
Yeah, you can start acting before you know what you're going to do.
Right.
Dane, I love that. You're a genius. The whole connection of kata and vocabulary and randori and speaking a language, it's beautiful. That's a great analogy.
Great. You get the first star of the day.
No, Darren already got that one. He earned it early on.
Okay. Anyway, okay, we're killing these topics. I mean, you know, that's why I said these are you know, these on the one hand, none of these are really deep philosophical issues like we've been dealing with for the past few meetings. They're really core concepts, and to an extent they're very easy to deal with, but they have to be dealt with. And I think this discussion is working very well in terms of setting some borders or parameters or ground rules or ideas for others to follow. Okay, here's our challenge, one of our challenges for the day. In the dojo, we tend to, and this happens in almost any martial arts dojo, we train our students to tap out, to say maitte when a hold is set, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And a good uke will tap out when they feel the hold is set. I know when Seki would get upset with me because he would have jujitsu competitions with the only rule you can't make face contact, and everything else was fair game. And he would get upset with me because I would tap out whenever I felt the hold was set. As a result, I never got any serious injuries. And my response to him, not being disrespectful, was, you told us if you believe a hold is set properly, you tap out to protect yourself from injury, or you say maitte. Okay, which is the purpose of having the tap out or maitte. The problem is, though, once you put a student in a street situation, can they afford to be waiting for their attacker to tap out? This is one of the questions. I mean, you know, how do you train your students to, because all the submissions we do in jujitsu are designed to cause injury, designed to keep person from being able to continue their attack. So the question is, how do we get students to recognize this difference? Okay, that's one question, because you can't hold a wrist press for 5 minutes if the attacker's on the ground, especially if he has friends. That's one part of the question. The other part of the question is no one really wants, I don't think any martial artist really wants to hurt another person, because there's a very strong philosophy of nonviolence. And I know from students who've been in street situations, they have felt really bad that they actually injured the other person, regardless of whatever that other person did. And I have to figure out the third part. So that's, it's a real conflict between training for safety and training for the street.
Sensei, may I jump in here?
The third factor is that if you are doing whatever technique you're doing correctly, odds are it's going to do the injury before the person even hits the ground, or they will sustain a serious injury when they hit the ground. So how do we program our students to do this? Or as we're gonna go back and pick on Dane again, or is it because it's Mushin? And I've told this to students, you don't realize at the time, you don't realize what you have done. And if you execute the technique properly, you're going to do it fairly fast, and it is going to cause an injury.
Yes.
And you, quote unquote, just have to be aware of that. I don't know whether that's a cop-out answer or what. So anyway.
Sensei, where I was going to jump in was to your third point, and you kind of made it for me. In the dojo, we modulate, and on the street, you go full speed when that's necessary. I know from experience going faster in the street, and what that feels like, as opposed to the whole modulation thing where you're going smoothly and effectively in the dojo. On the street, forget smooth and effectively. You're going full bore. And so, like you say, the injury would often happen before anybody hits the ground.
Any other thoughts? Or
you described two different scenarios, and talking about somebody being injured when they hit the ground or before they hit the ground. If I do a throw on someone, I can tell you from experience, from I first started, I didn't know how to fall, and somebody did an Ippon Seoinage on me, and I dislocated my shoulder. And that's what's going to happen on the street most of the time. That's different from if I put a wrist press on somebody, and there's an opportunity for them to say, okay, maitte, stop, don't go any further. In the class, we're going to say, okay, fine, but don't let go, just ease up a little bit. That gives you a chance to get out of Mushin and start thinking, what do I want to do next? Do I want to dislocate this wrist? Sure. Okay, fine. Take care of it. But if I'm doing a throw, they're hurt. They're not going to, because unless they know how to fall, they're hurt. On the other category is for joint locks and techniques like that. Then you got a choice on how much pressure you're going to put in, how much damage you want to do. And as long as you don't just automatically let go as soon as somebody taps, you have the opportunity to make that decision. How much do I want to do?
okay.
I think sometimes too, we conflate the training and it makes things confused. Like, ultimately you have to make a decision. Are you exclusively training for street effectiveness, or irrespective of that, do you still want to train? Even if you never ever used it, and even if it wouldn't be terribly effective, do you still want to train? And I think the training ends up catering to both people. You know, you can't have like the military teaches jujitsu techniques in the course of about a week. And that's long enough to hurt somebody, but not long enough to let them down well, not long enough to learn to fall, not long enough to condition responses like that, but long enough to make somebody fall and hurt themselves. And that's how you train when you just want somebody to know a couple things to hurt an enemy. Then they can go execute that without thinking about repercussions. They haven't seen them. They don't have to worry about maitte. They haven't heard it. But if they do that exact same training every week of their life for the next 30 years and never use it, they're doing a do, even if it's killing techniques. Now you're finding like the zen of killing techniques. You're finding the do of the killing techniques. Even if the techniques haven't changed, your training has. And you know, we train for one thing in the dojo, and then you want to use it for a different thing on the street. And that becomes conflicting because you spend 30 years of your life developing a training personality and relationships in a dojo and all of that. And then for 5 seconds, one time on a subway platform, you need to be this other person using it for something completely different. And I think that's what causes that discrepancy sometimes in that I think that gets to the core of why we have this topic to even talk about, because the way you carry out training is different than what you hope the training is useful for one day. Sometimes, you know, sometimes it isn't. And I think we talked too about that whole idea of like the restraints, where do you go from that? You know, once you've got the person in something that isn't going to incapacitate them, what do you do with them? And, you know, I just saw an article recently. I think it was in New York City. A woman was attacked by somebody, and she somehow managed to actually take the situation under control and had the guy down in some kind of a way. And he literally said, okay, I'm done. And she let him up. And then he just went back to it. And then he became the victor. So she actually had the upper hand and released what she was doing because he said he was done. And, you know, that is a very difficult thing because she didn't have training. So that's not even the idea of maitte and tapping is something that we have to consider because we literally train around that. But even somebody who doesn't, that is something that you have to overcome. With no training, somebody says, stop, leave me alone. I've had it. I'm okay. I'll run away now. They aren't going to.
No,
you know, you have to.
It's a judgmental call. And
Yeah.
somehow, I mean, the way I explain to my students is if you feel it comes down, do you think if you let this person go that you can leave the area safely? And that's a judgmental call too. It's all very subjective. And that's hard for a person to make that quote unquote snap decision. Pardon the triple entendre there. You know, it's a hard decision to make.
And say to Dane's point, you could do a tainagi, have somebody on the ground, you're holding that wrist press. You haven't broken the wrist, you haven't sprained the wrist, you're just holding it. They've got a perfectly fine other hand to reach down and pull a blade and stab you with it, or grab the heat and shoot you with it. And so again, you have to, like you say, make the judgment call. Do I sprain? Do I break in this situation? Somebody with a broken wrist will be a little more distracted and perhaps less likely to pull that boot pistol out.
Right. I mean, you know, you come to, you know, and the sad thing is different states have different laws. You know, in some states it's stand your ground, and you break the person's wrist, nobody's going to question you. And others, you know, I don't want to pick on California or maybe New York, but California, you can use what's called reasonable force, which means whatever is necessary to protect yourself from further injury. And there's no black and white on that. You know, it's really hard on the victim, which makes it hard on us as sensei in trying to help our students. I think the issue is you have to do the purpose of the technique, such as a wrist press after a hand throw, is to teach the student how to slowly apply pressure to get a submission. Whereas in the street, what you want them to do is they're just going to do the throw, come down, press down that hand and break it, and they're done. And that's a hard concept for some people, particularly kids, to get. Because the intent of every jiu-jitsu technique is either to control the person or disable them.
Right.
Those are literally your two choices. And if you brought my feeling is that if you brought a person down to the ground, you need to disable them. Yeah, there are situations where you can put them in control holds and, you know, walk them away or maybe get them to calm down or talk them down or what have you. But if you've actually thrown a person because they physically attacked you, that's the appropriate follow through. You're not going to have a discussion if this person comes at you with a knife swipe and you do a hand throw on them and they drop the knife in the process of the throw. You know, if that knife goes flying and it stabs someone else, who's responsible? Once they hit the ground, are you going to wait for submission? I'm done, I won't hurt you anymore, yada yada yada. Or are you just going to break the wrist? And many times, because it's a Mushin situation, you don't think. So you have to train. The issue is you have to train the students is this is what the technique does, and we need to practice this as close as possible to a real situation so the student gets the kata down in their mind so that in a Mushin situation, that's what happens. Okay. And then you run into the question is, if you break that person's wrist, was it intentionally? Or was it unintentionally because you weren't thinking about you weren't making a conscious decision about what you were doing? You know, it's kind of like there was on the news a couple of days, there was a teenager who kept coming at officers with a garden tool or something like that to attack them. And the body cam repeatedly showed them telling him to drop the weapon, and he just kept advancing toward them, and they shot him. Now, that's their training. So, did that officer actually make a conscious decision to shoot the teenager? Or was it their training and an automatic reaction? You've done this, you know, and you're basically protecting your life. So I don't know which is, you know, the hard part. I think that my core issue is how do we train our students to deal or maybe accept this reality?
And how do
I'll
we
add my
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I just hadn't heard one thing, and that was the value of putting students in competitions, you know, shiais and kumites, where you just go take it up a little bit further because you're in front of people, you're with somebody that you may not know, rather than your regular dojo partner. And there's an acceptance that you'll go a little bit past, that lock set of a hole before you tap. You're reluctant to tap in front of a large crowd, and you can't put people on the street and say, okay, make it to the other side, escape from New York style, but you can put them up in a little bit tenser situation.
But still not hurt someone. And that's still the tension. How do we train that?
Right,
but I don't know that I ever learned how to do that, get the right balance. You can train them to do kata, and it looks great. The technique's there, but most of the time we're teaching them to do stuff way past where on the street they would have disabled the person already. So you try to say, all right, well, I take the person, I throw him to the ground, I've got his wrist, his hand in a wrist lock, and as I drop to the ground, I just keep going with my hands and I break his wrist. Well, we can't do that. We can't actually get that muscle memory to work. So then we try to compensate. Well, okay, so as you're throwing them down to the ground, we're going to let go of his hand and throw our hands down to the ground, pretending that we just broke his wrist. So what are they going to do on the street? These are rhetorical questions because I don't have the answers. I never did have the answers. I never felt comfortable on what's the right balance. I don't know.
I think there's a lot to unpack here. I agree with both with Ernest and what Thomas is saying. When you talk about the Mushin response, you're talking about a lot, and so I think that this comes in levels, and I'm no different than anybody else that's on this call. I think that everybody on the call is at the level to understand when you respond, whether you think you've anticipated your response, or if you've responded with, through Mushin, then you understand what you're doing when you apply a technique, regardless. I mean, we all understand the end result of what these techniques can do that we practice every day. And we understand the difference between a real life scenario, understanding the scenario that we may be in reality versus a classroom environment. We understand that clearly. However, people with lesser experience may not. And so going through different repetitions in class and understanding how you have to get someone to be able to respond, react, comply, whatever you want to do, because you're applying a technique to not injure them, is different than what you need to be able to do where you may be in a scenario in real life. Where is your threshold? And then what can you do? And those things are never as pretty as they look like in a classroom environment. They're messy. And so how do you continue to maintain that control? And we also have to remember that applying certain techniques, and one of the techniques that we kept referencing is a hand throw, right? And we talk about a hand throw. And technically, if we're talking about a hand throw, I mean, I think everybody, I'm pretty sure, I'm confident everybody on the call understands this. If we're looking at most hand throws, or a hand throw, if we go with a Kodakaesh, that's not necessarily a throw. And it's certainly not something that you're going to use to be able to have somebody comply to do something. You actually going to do damage to somebody right there. Like, they're not going to fall. That wrist is compromised, whether it's the least amount, sprain, ligament damage, or worse, broken, right? They're not really falling. You may get movement out of them. And so if you understand how to apply it in that moment of Mushin, applying a technique to get the movement that you need to be able to move to something else, to be able to put them in a position to where you can have their compliance, then that's different. But it takes a very high level person to be able to do that, especially in those moments, especially when it's a response coming out of Mushin. And then again, it's never pretty. And I'm pretty sure I just confused the whole topic even more.
No, you didn't. In fact, I think, let me see if I can tie some shoelaces here without tying them together. I think part of it is students that I've had that have been in street situations have been surprised at the amount of injury they have done. It may be from the technique directly, but a lot of it, if you look back at your own students usually get injured when they are new because they don't know how to respond to the techniques that's being done to them. And that's what leads to the injury. And the injury that occurred, yeah, you shoulder lock, you may dislocate their shoulder. Okay. That's the way it's designed to be. And if the person resists, it's going to dislocate their shoulder even before they hit the ground. There's that strong potential. However, once they hit the ground, then they have a possibility of breaking the other shoulder, a concussion, possible broken ribs, all this other, for lack of a better phrase, collateral damage that is done to the body if they go full bore with a shoulder lock or takedown, or if they do a hand throw. You're going to have the same. If they don't know how to fall, if they don't know how to go with the technique, they're going to get injured.
Yeah.
And that's what surprises a lot of students is, I broke his wrist, but then how did he get a concussion? How did he break his other shoulder? How did he crack his ribs? I didn't do any of that. No, you didn't. They did. I mean, that's kind of a flaky excuse, but if you do a technique correctly, there's a lot of collateral damage beyond what the technique was supposed to do. And that's that again is something that's hard to explain to students. Also, a person on the street may not know how to fall at all. They may be on drugs and not feeling anything until they get some serious injuries. It's you cannot ultimately control what this other person does. All you can do is do what you do, and whatever happens, which is what happens anyway. So Darren, I think your explanation is fine. I followed it, and it goes.
I think the classroom environment really is 3D in real life, and it's no different than this, right?
Right.
A new student comes to a classroom and they're scared or intimidated by the black belt, when in fact they should never be intimidated or scared from the black belt. They should be more concerned about the white belt, because
Right.
the black belt should never injure them. And that comes to real life, right? So
it's the white belts that cause the injuries.
Right.
not our fault. Or is it? I'm sorry, everybody. I have to bow out, unfortunately, a little early today. Great topics. It's always great sharing comments and discussion with everyone, but I need to go a little soon today. I apologize. I look forward to the next session.
Okay. Thanks very good, Darren. Thank you very much for joining us.
See you, Darren.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.
Have a nice St. Patty's Day.
Okay, thank you.
Blow up my candles for me. Anyway. Okay. Related to this tapping out in maitte, there's some issues inside the dojo, and this is beyond this issue of street reality versus dojo reality. And this is an issue that senseis have to deal with. One is ego, the other is safety. There are some students who will make a conscious decision if a hold is being set. I'm going to see how much pain I can take before I tap out. Okay, and these are ego issues. If I tap out, does it show that I'm weak? Or I really don't want to train with this person, so I'm going to give them a tough time. So how do you deal with that type of student in those scenarios?
I think they need to deal with it, Sensei. I think those are all I think that's what they're there to do. Like, that's why they're learning a martial art. They need to learn those exact lessons. You shouldn't think like that. right? Like
I agree.
you can't teach somebody that. That's what they have to learn, you know, through those lessons. That is such a pervasive thing in dojos, probably maybe more so in karate dojos. I don't know. But there's a lot more. I don't know if there's more or less, but that challenge mentality exists in every dojo, universally. There's always people there that are there to find out something about themselves, to challenge themselves, to show that they can take pain, to show that they're invulnerable, to show that they're better than everybody. And I think the way that you teach that is to let them learn that that's not true. Let them, to a degree, let them do those little challenges. And I think it irons itself out pretty quickly. Like I can remember situations, there was a person in particular who was like a bar fighter, tough guy kind of person. And they came to a dojo that did full contact, karate sparring. And they had that chip on their shoulder for about 2 lessons. And then after that, they did not. You have to humble yourself. You can't get humbled. You know what I mean? You have to learn. Those are the lessons they're there to learn, is that they are incorrect about those things.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, so we switch off on partners. So some people work better with other people, right? And then some people just have so much more skill than the person that's giving them a hard time that they soon come to find out, okay, well, maybe I just should shut up and learn. So we do a technique, and then we say switch partners, and by the end, you probably work with the same person twice, and done 7 or 8 techniques on a typical night.
Okay.
But yeah, switching partners helps.
Okay.
And there's the other side of it, George. You've got the person who wants to prove something. You said, I don't want to work with that person because, so I've got to prove myself. And then you've got students come and say, I don't want to work with that person because he's going to hurt me. And so it goes on both sides. And I agree with, you might have to have the person who wants to tough it out and say, I can take it all. Okay, they're going to have to learn that lesson the hard way. But what do you do about the other one? Because otherwise you're going to lose that student.
Sensei,
Kind of the same thing there too, right? They kind of need to learn that lesson too. The entire point of karate or of a martial art is dealing with somebody you're uncomfortable dealing with, right?
Well, if you're afraid that they're going to hurt you, I'm sympathetic to the student at that point, because I've told them there's no point in taking a self-defense class if you keep getting injured. It's counterproductive.
Exactly. You're there to learn self-defense, not get yourself injured.
Right.
And in my time, I've worked with 2 different black belts who have a blindness toward what's involved in safely catching a person on hard throws, the kind that result in high falls, and it's interesting because they've achieved black belt, sometimes high dan grades, and these 2 individuals, there's a blindness there. They don't get it, so they do injure people, and they've done it on and off throughout their career. And some people fall better than others, so they tend to gravitate towards training partners that fall extremely well, and those that don't fall as well are going to get injured and avoid working with them. That blindness, some students learn, but some people it's instilled in them, and discussing it with them doesn't change. They don't get it. They just don't get it. Even at the high dan grades, and both these black belts are in high dan grades.
Okay. One of the things, as a sensei, you do have to watch your students when they're doing techniques, and I'm sure we all do that. If I find there's a student who's being really stubborn and not tapping out, and I see the hold is being set for, I will, if I see a pattern, I will pull that student aside and say, ask them what are their reasons for doing this. And they may say, well, they're not applying enough pressure, or yada, yada, whatever. And I'll say, the criteria I'd like you to use is, do you feel they are doing the technique correctly? And is the hold properly set? And if it's properly set, you should be tapping out before it hurts. Okay, it's not a matter of how much pain can you take, because they're practicing the technique. If I see a student consistently does it, and I think this has maybe only happened once or twice in 58, 57, 8, I've actually had to say, you need to decide whether you want to continue on this program, because ultimately someone's going to come along that's going to injure you. And that's going to be a fracture. And is that something you want? And that's their judgment call. You have, for a student who has, quote, this ego problem, you have to be very straight up with them. And say, I won't, I won't tolerate that kind of an injury in my class, because it could have been avoided. And that puts you at fault for your own stubbornness, for lack of a better phrase. And student, you can present that in a manner that's not offensive to them for the most part. The other issue is, new students have a tendency, when they throw a person, they just drop them. They let gravity do its job. Okay. And all of us know that experienced black belts, we could put a person through the concrete if we wanted to. You can apply downward force and momentum all the way until after they've hit the ground. And you won't have to do anything else. They are done. But one of the things that tell students that the reason we are wearing judo gi is so that you can learn. You have a responsibility, at least in here and maybe also in the street, to how hard you let the person hit the ground. And that's why you're wearing a judo gi. Once you see they're going, if you pull up on their sleeve a little bit, you're going to make it easier for them to break the fall, and they're not going to land so hard. Okay. And I'll actually have them practice that, both as a thrower and the person who is thrown, just so that they learn the difference, because that control is extremely important on the street. Okay. And I've been in that situation once with a student at the junior high I was teaching at. He just wanted to know if I knew jujitsu. So he came up behind me one day, put a ballpoint pen around for my neck and pulled my other arm behind me. And he got a good elbow into the ribs, and I threw him. Then I realized he was one of my students, my #1 problem student. And by the time, and we were on concrete, and I pulled up on his arm, he hit the ground fairly gently, had a few scrapes, and life went on, and he changed his entire attitude about me. He really became a model student after that. But the idea is you expect, one of the things you want your students to learn is control. Just like anything, whether you're putting mustard on a hot dog or firing a handgun or rifle, you have to have control. Because you don't want to have mustard all over the hot dog bun. God forbid you chose a hamburger bun to put the hot dog in. Anyway, so yeah, it is an ego issue, and most of the time, if you approach if you approach a problem straight up with the student, or the student is applying too much pressure too fast and risking injury, it's the same thing. Because what you're trying to have them learn is controlling the technique so that ultimately they might be able to control the amount of damage. But then again, if you've done a hand throw, their wrist is probably broken, and they do it on the street, the wrist is probably broken before they hit the ground anyway, and you won't be able to do the hand throw anyway. So it's, I don't know how you resolve that. But okay, the other issue is if, and again, these are safety issues. Do you have a quote unquote standard in your class for tapping out? And if a student taps out too quickly, does the Tory actually learn how to complete the technique effectively? Or is it all a judgment call?
George, I can go back to what Ernest said earlier, because we do the same thing. Practice the technique with multiple students and pretty much go through everybody else. So there might be somebody who's gonna say, yeah, I'm not gonna do the technique properly. The next one, they'll get the practice. So it averages out.
Okay.
But if I'm working with the same person all the time, that's a different problem. But I think when you're working with so many different people, it averages out. It doesn't become a problem.
Okay. I mean, that's many sensei follow that procedure. I mean, if you're never going to get the same attacker on the street.
Right.
And I think on that exact same point too, from the other side, like Thomas is saying, when you are sharing partners, that one partner who's kind of phoning it in gets evened out and you're okay. But that person phoning it in is never going to learn the technique either. Feeling the technique done to you correctly is exactly how you learn how to do it correctly.
Right.
You'll never just do it by doing it to somebody else. You have to feel what it's supposed to feel like when it really works. And you just never will. So you're never going to know if you're doing it right.
Because what happens if the technique is done correctly on you, when you're doing it correctly on another person, you have a really good idea of what they're feeling and what's happening. And that's what's essential in any technique is, I mean, that's a good probably the best argument to have is that you need to know what the technique feels like so that you know what you are doing to this other person. Because that's what gives you the control. So, between
and escape routes too. It's like when you feel it, you feel the panic of what you want to do to get that to stop. You know what I mean? Like if somebody starts the Teinagi on you, you feel like you want to back up and turn, or you feel like you want to do those things, so you know to expect that reaction. This is going to make somebody pull back. This is going to make them bend over.
right.
You bent over,
Right. But yeah, and if you know if the technique is being done to you and you know how to react, that then allows you to protect yourself. It's kind of like, for lack of a better phrase, and I've used this in classes, I apologize for the analogy, but how many of you know the experiment with Pavlov's dogs? If you're familiar with that experiment, he rang the bell and the dogs eventually, the dogs would salivate when he rang a bell because they were trained that when he rang the bell, it would be followed by food. So they would salivate. And, what you're doing in learning the technique is you're learning how to react to protect yourself. And that becomes an automatic reaction, much like Pavlov's dogs. The dogs had Mushin. Hey, it's so thank you for laughing, Thomas, and Ernest, thank you for smiling, and Dane, because that's, you know, that's the reaction you're going to get from your students if they get it. And that's what you're after, because if you can get a point across and everyone smiles or chuckles, you know that they understand what you are saying. And they don't have to say a word. And they're, you know, how do you say it? So anyway,
I just had one quick question to Dane, because he didn't go quite as far as I thought he was. But when you see somebody that's not doing that technique and not really experiencing the true feeling of the technique, is that when you step in and stop the class and demonstrate, here's what you should be feeling.
if if I feel this, okay. I mean, I've had a couple of students that were extremely loosely jointed, and you know, they would just stand there as techniques were done with a smile on their face, and I'd say, you know, and the lower ranks you can kind of ignore it a little bit. As they move up in ranks, say, look, you know what this technique is supposed to do. Please respond in a way that the Tory can continue with the technique and see what's happening to a normal person. Because, you know, I don't want to say you're not normal, but see what, you know, because this is part of your training, to feel how it feels, because that's going back to what Dane said. I think is that's how you determine the effectiveness of your technique, is by how the other, you know, how the other person is responding. And so that's something you do to help the other student learn. If they're being resistant, then I have to, I'll, you know, if I see they're being consistently resistant, not just with one student, but with many students, I'll pull them aside and say, you know, eventually you're going to get an injury out of this, or it's going to be a cumulative injury because you've been resisting, and you may just be toughing the pain out, but eventually it's going to come back and bite you. You know, it may be 5 or 10 years from now, but you're going to have arthritis in that joint. And at that point, it's really too late to do anything about it, unless you have a joint replaced, and that limits you further. You know, so you somehow have to appeal to a sense of logic rather than trying to put them down. Yeah, you don't want to put a student down and say, you know, you need to realize this potentially can, you are injuring yourself. If you're feeling uncomfortable, if it's starting to hurt, you are doing damage if you allow that to continue. And I'm telling you this for your safety, because I want you to last till, you know, age 150 in good health. You know, and sometimes students will get it and sometimes they don't. I mean, and then eventually some, you know, they say, they'll come to class, they say, Sensei, I can't do this tonight, I have a sore shoulder. Then you say, okay, well, we'll try and work around it. You don't say, see, I told you so. I mean, that might be the appropriate thing to say if it's your gut, you know, if that's your gut feeling without thinking about it. But sometimes you have to be a little more tactful. So, yeah, it's yeah, you do have students like that on occasion, and that's the advantage of, you know, or you can say sometimes, such as an earnest situation, as many of us, if a lot of students are complaining that you're resisting techniques, maybe you need to think about what you're doing, because it's not just one student. And I don't want to see you get injured either, you know, because someone gets tired of your attitude, or because it's cumulative. You may have to explain what cumulative is to some students, but it does add up. So, okay. Okay, we're about 9:25 here. What else do we have here? We covered topic C already under tapping out maitte, which is how do we essentially deal with the issue of students? Oh, we did PTSD if they actually legitimately injure another attacker. I think we've covered this in previous discussions. What I will do is usually the student will tell me if they've been in a street situation. Or you can see they'll come to you because they're upset about it, or they haven't told I know some kids, I haven't told my parents yet because I'm afraid I'll get in trouble.
Yeah,
If it was kids, they don't want to get in trouble with their parents, but they'll come to you and confide in you. This is what happens when you're a teacher, even in the classroom. They will tell you things that they would not tell their parents. And sometimes, in various states, there are various laws as to, there are some things legally I have to pass on to the counselor or administration, and there are other things I don't have to. And I will tell my student, if a student comes to me with an issue, I will be very upfront with them and say, if we're going to talk about this, please be aware that by law, I have to inform the counselor that this, or administrator that this is going on. And very rarely does that affect the discussion that takes place. Because if someone comes to you with a problem, you have to be very honest and upfront with them in anything. And that's hard. That's hard to do. In the case of if they have to defend themselves, before I die here, excuse me. If they successfully defended themselves on the street, and they injured the other person, you have to be willing to listen to them as many times as it takes to give them you're their how do you call it, you're someone they can vent to, and usually by them talking it out themselves, they can, it may take longer than you say, oh, this is okay, you did the right thing, yada yada yada. If they can figure out for themselves that they did the right thing, that they were reasonable, and they did what they could to avoid, they the human mind is an amazing thing, and 9 times out of 10 they can resolve the issue themselves, but that may take several discussions. It may take time, because what they have to do is rebuild their sense of self-confidence in themselves, that they didn't do anything wrong, they're okay, all these really subjective feelings that we as sensei normally don't have to deal with, because most of our students don't go out and get in fights on the street. But it's I mean, that's the way I've dealt with it, and I've been successful with it. But if your students know that, like, even when I taught public school, my phone number was in the phone book. A lot of teachers wouldn't do that. I don't want my kids calling me at home. And I had my phone number in the phone book. I wouldn't give it out in class, but how many calls did I get a year? 1, maybe 2. And all the kids wanted was an ear. They wanted someone who would listen to them as they worked through a problem. And that's the hardest thing for a teacher or a parent to do. Okay, anyway, that's the way I approach it. I don't know if any of you have had students that have been in street situations and they've come back. Does anyone else have that experience? And what?
Twice. 2 times.
What do you do, Dave?
Well, wow. The first time was somebody who had gone off to university, and it was a mugging situation. Guy said, "Let me hold your." He was approached by two people. Said one of them said, "Let me hold your newspaper." Well, he knew where that was going. The next question is going to be, "Let me hold your wallet." So he threw the newspaper in their face and followed up with one of these to the guy's nose, and they both ran off, and that was the end of it. But he landed it, and he's a karate student. The other time was an in-home situation where the rest of the family left except a longtime family friend, and it was an attempted rape. And the student had studied in our dojo for 5 months and combined two techniques they'd never combined before, and effectively ended it very rapidly and got away. But they didn't tell their parents for a week, and they didn't come to me for 2 weeks. But they did tell their parents and discuss it before they came to me. The other time, a person came to me first before he told his parents. But yeah, it's interesting because one was kind of happy about it, the mugging. The other one felt all kinds of angst. I mean, just all kinds of angst. And it was very reticent to talk to parents and very reticent to talk to me. Really talked to me about it only after having, kind of gotten as far as he felt he could get with parents.
Right. It is difficult, and you have to be. It may, you as a sensei, or because you're a sensei, a teacher, a parent, close friend, a priest, a rabbi, if you're doing your job, you're all of these people in addition to teaching martial art. That's part of the job. And it may be a matter of, if I notice a student that's really upset, I would actually go up there, "Are you okay? Is there something bothering me?" And if they yeah, I'm fine, yeah. I say, well, regardless of if they say I'm fine, yada yada, you'll say, well, if you really need someone to just listen to you, let me know. And you may have to leave it at that, and because if you can get the person to come to you, the odds of resolving the issue are much higher than if you go to them and push it. Okay, because that's what sometimes some people do. They'll push an issue on. If I say to Dane, what's the problem? Why is the wall behind you aqua colored? Shouldn't it be a happier color? Or did that used to be a bedroom and that color helps you go to sleep? If you start asking a bunch of questions, it can literally turn the other person off to you. And so you have to ask them, how do you say, they're not innocuous questions, but they're open-ended, where you want them to feel that they're secure. It's whatever they say to you will be secure. And sometimes even I, as a teacher, student would tell me information, and I would have told them, I have to tell an administrator about this. I'm required by law. I would filter that information so that I would protect that student as best I could. I might not even mention his name if it was something, it was just a matter of information. And because as a parent, you're a parent, you have to protect your students. And I would do that. And very rarely would I have to mention the student's name, and very rarely did they ever get called in by an administrator or someone, because of what they told me. Because you have to, I for the most part, I was able to keep my sources of information anonymous. And it's amazing how much upper level people will accept anonymous if it has some validity. Because they don't really care about the source. They just want to be able to act on it. And I'm not saying that negatively, but that's just, you know, because they have to act. So, you know, it's you do the best you can to protect your students. One is by teaching them a martial art. The other is being their confidant as much as possible. So, anyway, I think we've taken care of this topic. Do we want to deal with the door issue?
You know, real quick, Sensei, just to belabor the point on the last topic too long. It just occurred to me that kind of that exact thing happening when you have to use it in real life and the feelings that come with that and everything. That's like real world training. Like it's like concentrated black belt kind of a thing. In one class, you got the black belt experience by having to do something in real life and then having to get through that mentally. You know, we've talked before, the martial arts are a way to learn self-defense and get those techniques and all of that. But then why keep going? You know, once you've got a black belt and you know how to do these things, why do it for another 30 years? And the idea there is that you're becoming perfect. You're perfecting things and all of that, and you're doing this growth. And ultimately, that's all mental. What you're really trying to do is mentally grow from the time you're a white belt to the time you're, you know, moved on. And in a lot of ways, while the training is practical and you can use it for self-defense, I think the ultimate aim of it is to simulate the mental growth you get from using it in self-defense. So, you know, rather than have one life and death experience where you have to kill another samurai and then spend the rest of your life thinking about it, you spread that out over 30 years in a dojo doing things gently, right? So it's you're actually engaged in the metaphor of life and death combat to stimulate the kind of mental growth you would get from life and death combat. And you spread it out over a 30-year experience, an hour a week, you know. But then when you get attacked in real life, it's 5 minutes that will shape your life forever. And
5 seconds, yeah.
Yeah, even that. So like that mental growth that's happening is happening. What would normally take a martial artist 30 years to have these incremental conclusions and epiphanies, you had all of them in 5 seconds last night, and you don't know what to do with that, you know.
Okay.
And I think that's kind of beyond like the psychological things of injuring somebody and all of those things. I think it's all of these realizations happening and all of these lessons happening, and you've changed now. You're not who you were the day before. And, you know, we're used to more gradual things. Like it takes many years to become an artist. It takes many years to become whatever you're being. But this happened in a night. It happened in 5 seconds. And I think that's just something I wanted to add.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Anyone want to throw anything else in the ring on this topic? Okay,
Just real quick, not for today, but maybe a future topic, and I'll write it up and send it to you. But teaching female students, in particular, the self-defense seminars where they're not regular students, but you could tell sometimes that you're just not used to working with a man or being touched by a man, and they have to become comfortable with that. If they become students, they have to become comfortable with that because the majority of their training partners are going to be male. But there may be some hidden trauma, something going on. You just don't know. But working with female students is different than working with male students.
Okay, definitely submit that as a topic because that could be a whole nother hour right there.
Do a write upon it, you know, send to me with subtopics, etc. I mean, I've had significant experience with that. And just so you, I've had some girls that don't care whether it's male or female they're working with, and some are very, it's their, how do you say, it's their social upbringing or whatever you want to call it, that usually affects, like you said, how they deal with men. Passive submissive versus we're equal. And that's going to make all the difference in the world in their training. But anyway, yes, that's.
Then there's anger issues from a lot of those who have been abused,
Yes,
emotionally or physically or sexually. Those anger issues can come to class.
right. So yeah, now you got some more subtopics to throw in there. But yeah, it would be an excellent topic. Okay, do we want to deal with the door issue today or save it for next week? I don't know what your time schedules are.
Sensei, I'm going to need to leave soon, but I just wanted everybody else to know that it is your birthday tomorrow. You're a St. Patrick's Day child, and I think all of us here would enjoy wishing you a very happy tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's
Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
And we'll save you the indignant experience of having us sing that song to you.
How do you say it? One of the frustrations of, quote, getting more experience in life is if all you guys lived within 50 miles, we would have a party. At this point, either many of my quote unquote martial arts and other friends have either moved to different parts of the country, or they've moved to the great tatami up in the sky, or things of that sort. And so it's going to be a very quiet 80th birthday, so anyway, but life goes on, and I hope to be around for several more years at least.
Decades.
I wish. But anyway, so I wish you, thank you very much for the birthday wishes. I want to wish you a happy weekend. Stay sober. If you've never had an Irish coffee, go have one just for the experience. But don't drink it too fast. It's not as bad as it's not as strong as a Long Island iced tea. But anyway, I haven't had one of those probably about either one in maybe 10, 12 years now. But anyway, have a great weekend, and take care of yourselves, and we'll see you back here on April 6th, I believe it is. That's the Saturday, first Saturday in April. And let's see how many. Just bear with me, Ernest. Yeah, we would probably get to your topic in probably a couple sessions. But get it to me anyway. And if any of you have any other topics or thoughts you think are worthy of discussion, because if we have a list like today's topics, it's something to look forward to, because it's none of it's the topics we dealt with today, none of it is rocket science. Anyhow, so I think that's going to be it for today. What?
I just said thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I enjoy it.
Take care. Don't do anything too dangerous. I mean, Mother Nature be good to you for the next few weeks. Okay. Take care.
Good weekend.
Everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.